All right, so the where we are here in this unit is just finishing up a few final details regarding osmosis and diffusion, and then we're going to move into our last section, which is photosynthesis and cellular respiration. So we'll get through photosynthesis today. So first of all, we talked about most of this stuff today as we were going over your homework. So heat energy. As we heat up molecules, what happens? Raise your hand. What happens to them as we heat molecules? Caitlin?
They separate.
They do expand, get larger. And what else? Michael?
They move around, like they get excited.
Yeah, they move around more quickly. Heat adds energy to molecules. Heat causes molecules to start to move more quickly, to vibrate faster. And so if we're thinking about the states of matter, solids, liquids, and gases, diffusion will happen quickest in a gas. Because in a gas, the molecules are moving more quickly than in a liquid or in a solid.
Because it's the hottest?
Yes.
The whole hottest.
And so the rate of diffusion is dependent on really two factors. The first one we just talked about is obviously heat. So if we have two jars and we put a drop of food coloring in each of them, which of these jars was filled with warmer water? Good?
The one on the left.
One on the left. The dye had diffused throughout that bottle more quickly. It's still in the process of diffusing in this bottle. This must have been the warmer water.
Gotcha.
There's another factor that comes into play when we're talking about diffusion through a membrane, and that is surface area. So the surface area through which the molecules can diffuse. A greater surface area means diffusion can happen more quickly. And this comes into play when we talk about human physiology a little bit. So in our bodies, you have a question, Madison?
Yes.
Okay.
So when I'm like heat energy, it said, okay, so up there you
Yeah.
wrote it causes molecules to vibrate, right? Is that like why when you like boil water it like bubbles and
No, that's, I mean, it's related, but it's related to changes in density as water gets heated. We're going to talk about that. It's called a convection current. We'll talk about
Are
that
those the things
in our heat
in
energy.
like in
So let's talk about
yeah, in the
Lucas.
mantle.
So surface area in our bodies. Diffusion is very important in the human body, in all living things really, because it's how material move from place to place. One good example is in the small intestine. So we know that as you eat your ham and cheese bagel at lunch today,
Oh,
right now in your digestive system, if that's what you ate, the bagel is being digested. The starch in the bagel is being broken down into simpler nutrients, things like glucose and other simple sugars. And that food eventually will move into the small intestine. And those small molecules that your food was digested into will be passing into your bloodstream to be delivered throughout your body. So it's in your intestines where nutrients from your food diffuse into your blood. So obviously that's important. Your intestine, if you were to slice open my abdomen and take my intestines, unwind them, they would probably stretch across from here to the windows, maybe.
You got some big
That's how long our intestines are. The small intestine, it's all wound up inside our abdomen. Okay? And so, Lucas, turn around. Be quiet. The inside of that tube, it's not like a hollow, smooth, like a hose on the inside, if you can imagine. That's not what the inside of our intestines look like. If it was, and we were to slice open that intestine, okay, and sort of spread it out to see how much of a surface area, it would be maybe about the desk. You know, that surface area. That would be the area in which molecules can diffuse from our food into our blood. But that's not what our intestine looks like. It's not smooth on the inside. It actually has these projections, these little, look like fingers poking out of it, these folds called the villi. And they are all, throughout all of our intestine, these villi. And so you can imagine having all these bumps and ridges, what does that do to the surface area that you have inside there. Rosalind? Yeah, it gives it a much larger surface area. If you think, if you had to drive a car from point A to point B and it's flat, well, you just drive it. But if it goes up a huge hill and down a hill and up a hill again, what's the distance you have to drive? Much farther to go the same distance. So that's sort of what it's like in our intestine. All these bumps and ridges increase the surface area. That's a much larger area for nutrients to go through the wall of our intestine into our bloodstream. The actual surface area of our intestine, because it has all those bumps, is about 2 basketball courts. So it's not the surface area of your desk, it's the surface area of 2 basketball courts. That's the increase caused by all those bumps and ridges. The same is true in our lungs. You know, our lungs are not like a hollow plastic bag that inflates with air. They're made of all these little clusters of alveoli, they're called. These little air sacs, kind of looks like a head of broccoli. And each little air sac, okay, what it does is it vastly increases the surface area, because in our lungs, what's the important diffusion that takes place? In our lungs. Lucas?
The blood.
Well, blood is there, but what's moving?
Is it the air?
Let's be more specific. Rosalind? Carbon dioxide is diffusing from where to where? Sasha? Well, sort of. That's not diffusion, but you're close, right?
Is it going out of our blood?
Yes, it's diffusing from our blood into the air in our lungs, and then we exhale it. What's going the other way?
Oh.
Sophia? Oxygen. When we inhale, we bring oxygenated air into our lungs. It diffuses through these alveoli into our blood, and that blood delivers it to all the other parts of our body. So diffusion is very important. All these little alveoli, they take the surface area of our lung to 1 full basketball court about. Okay, so that's a much larger surface area. If you imagine if our lungs were just like hollow bags, I don't know, maybe they'd be the surface area of your desk as well.
Did you realize that you gave us an optical illusion when you did the basketball points?
I did not. What is the optical illusion?
It looks like one is going more up straight and the
Oh.
other one's tilted.
Is it? Maybe it is. All right, couple other terms here. So passive transport is a general term we have for the movement of molecules that does not require any energy. So we know that in diffusion, as we studied in osmosis, the molecules just move from high to low concentration due to the inherent motion of molecules. No additional energy needs to be put in to move these molecules from place to place. Okay? And we know in passive transport, molecules always move from what to what concentration? High to low concentration. Imagine if you had like a bowling ball up on a hill, it would roll from high on the hill down to low on the hill on its own. You wouldn't have to push it, you just let it go, and it would roll down the hill. And so osmosis and diffusion are examples of passive transport. If you think back to my example of sticking every 7th grader in the school in this classroom, okay? And then if I open up that door, I wouldn't have to like push people over into that room. I wouldn't have to put in any energy. You would just spread out on your own without any additional energy being added because you're going from a high to low concentration. However, if I took every 7th grader and shoved them in this room, would any 9th graders want to come in here? No. But if I were able to find a 9th grader, I could grab one of them and I could exert a little bit of energy and shove them into this room full of 7th graders. Now I would have to expend a little bit of energy. I would be moving them from what concentration in the hallway? Low into a higher concentration. But I could do it. But I have to put in some energy. It's not just going to happen on its own. That's an example of active transport. In active transport, energy needs to be put in. And it can move molecules the opposite of the normal way they would go, from low to high concentration. It's like if I have the bowling ball, could I push it up high in the hill?
Yes.
Yeah, but I'm going to have to put in some energy pushing it up there. Okay? So this is important also in living things. In living things, sometimes molecules need to be moved the opposite they need to go from low to high concentration. One example is a common biochemical process that happens using this protein called the proton pump. The proton pump is a large protein that's stuck in the cell membrane. And its job is to take protons, or hydrogen ions, we might call them, and to pump them from inside the cell to outside of the cell. Now, where is there a higher concentration of those protons? Outside. And so it's moving these hydrogen ions from a lower concentration to a higher concentration. So that's going to be an example of active transport. And it's going to require energy. The cell needs to expend some energy to move these atoms in this way. Okay. Later on, just like you could pump water up a hill, but it would take some energy. But then, once that water is running back down, what could you do? To get energy back again, right? Same sort of thing happens in cells. They could pump these hydrogen ions out and later on let them back in, and when they come back in, they can do some work for the cell. You'll cover that in ninth grade.
Do they make more energy than they lose?
No, it's energy neutral, because you can't really create, or it's just transferring that energy into a different form. All right, so just to finish up here with osmosis, or not quite to finish up, if we take this 2% salt solution in a dialysis tubing sac, let's assume that the dialysis tubing is impermeable to salt, permeable to water. If I put that in this beaker that has 100% water, what would happen to that dialysis tubing sac? Madison?
It would get bigger because the water from the beaker is going.
Yeah, there's a higher concentration of water in the beaker. It would be flowing into that. It would get larger. What if I put it in a 10% salt solution? Remove?
It's
It would get smaller because it would be losing water because there's a higher concentration of water in the dialysis tubing than there is in the beaker. And finally, in beaker C, which is 2% salt, Ian?
It would stay the same.
Yeah, it would stay the same. There would be molecules moving in and out, but in roughly the same amounts. So would it change in size?
Gotcha.
I'm going to skip that slide for a minute. So, let's get the definition first. So, when cells, as we talked about many times, are exposed to salt water or some other liquid that has a low concentration of water, we know that they lose water, they shrivel, they shrink. That process is called plasmolysis. Plasmolysis is the shrinking of a cell due to water loss. I'll show you an example. So we've seen these cells before. What was this from? Yeah, Elodia. So we have our cells here. What's inside of these Elodia cells? Sophia? Chloroplasts. All these round circles are chloroplasts. Where's the cell membrane in these cells? Lucas?
Isn't it like towards the middle? Or
No.
no? Wait, I'm trying to remember. Give me a sec.
Rosalind?
on like the very outside. It's like
It's on the very outside. It's like right next to this cell wall. Now, if we add salt water to this slide and look at the cells, they change. So, what has happened to these cells? Daniel?
it's lost water, so like the membrane came in on it.
Yeah. Have the cell walls changed? No, the cell walls are just a rigid sort of shell. They basically stay in the same place, so we can still see the cell wall. But what we see is that the cytoplasm has lost water and therefore has shrunk and shriveled up. Now we can see this is the cell membrane all around the outside. It no longer goes all the way to the edges of the cell wall because it's lost water and it shrank.
Yeah.
These are some cells, these are red onion cells. like if you see in the grocery store those kind of purplish onions, they're that color because the thin membrane separating the layers, the cytoplasm of those cells has this purple pigment in them, and it looks like this under the microscope. The white is the cell wall. Everything in purple is cytoplasm. If you add salt water to those cells, they change. Again, the cell membrane shrinks in, withdraws from the cell wall. There's some white space around the outside, that's just empty space. The cytoplasm gets slightly darker because it's more concentrated. And that's how things look when we add a 20% salt solution. Daniel?
Didn't you already show us this slide?
I don't know, did I?
Yeah.
Okay. And we can return them
Yeah.
back to the original by adding 100% water back again.
And some of the purple is lost.
What?
Not as bad.
Yeah, it looks a little different.
It's probably because of the light.
All right, so we'll finish up today just by talking about photosynthesis. Now, what we are going to be talking about with these two cell processes, they are both chemical reactions that take place. So a chemical reaction, you take two elements or compounds, and something happens and they get rearranged into new configurations, forming new substances. That's what a chemical reaction is. And photosynthesis is a chemical reaction that takes place in the chloroplast of plant cells. So, when we write a chemical reaction like this, okay, we have sort of these, you could call the things on the left side sort of the raw materials, the things that are needed, the ingredients to this chemical reaction. On the other side of the arrow are what's made, what's produced, the end products. So what is photosynthesis? It requires three things. Give me one of the things. Mahmoud?
Light.
It needs light. It then needs two other things. Two other compounds. Rosalind, what's one? It needs water. And Daniel?
Soil.
Well, it needs the soil to get the water from, but that's not part of the chemical reaction. Lucas? No, the same sort of thing. Chlorophyll helps it to absorb the light, but it's not a part of the reaction itself. It's not one of the molecules that gets rearranged. Madison? No. Another gas. Caitlin? No. That? Carbon dioxide. So we are going to use chemical symbols when we write these things, rather than words. So every compound has a chemical formula. Water, we know, is H2O. And what does that tell us? What is water? Lillian? Yeah, we would call them atoms. So two atoms of hydrogen bonded to a single atom of oxygen. What's the chemical symbol for carbon dioxide? Michael? CO2. It's two atoms of oxygen bonded to a single carbon atom. So those are our raw materials, our ingredients, the things that are needed. The water comes from the soil into the roots of a plant. Carbon dioxide comes from the air. Light obviously comes from the sun. And then we produce two things in photosynthesis. There are two products. We already talked about one of them. Melania? Glucose. That's the food part. When we say plants make their own food, it's glucose. Chemical symbol of glucose is C6H12O6. Yes, you'll have to know that. C6H12O6. So obviously glucose is a larger molecule than water, than carbon dioxide. And this is what the plant is going to use, we might say, as its food, its source of energy. And it's going to produce one byproduct. Okay?
Well, I would just have a question. If glucose is, so I mean, since it's a simple sugar, isn't it?
Yeah.
So then does that mean there's like atoms? Does that mean there's things with that way more atoms in them?
What do you mean?
Because it's
Like for complex sugars, is there?
Yeah, like plants use glucose and then can add glucose molecules together to make larger molecules like cellulose.
But like for he's saying like for like if glucose is just a simple Is there like
Oh.
molecules that have like a lot of?
Yeah, we don't list out, we usually would say like 6 of those bonded together, but
Okay.
yeah. And finally, there's one gas that's produced as a byproduct. Lucas?
Oxygen.
Oxygen, O2.
I've
Hold
heard-
on one second. So the things, we have a technical term for the things on the left side of the arrow. They're called the reactants. The things on the right side are called the products. And when you look at the elements that are involved in this, what do you notice when you compare the right side and left side? Rosalind?
That there's like more materials to make.
I'm not sure if I understand. Mahmood?
There's like more products that you have to use to like make it.
I don't know. I think you said the same sort of thing. Ian?
There's more molecules from the light, the oxygen, the.
We'll finish it out. It's the same elements on both sides, right? We have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen on the left. We must have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen on the right.